I am Maya Reeves, and I was 28, the night I sat at my own rehearsal dinner sipping sparkling water while my father raised a glass and took credit for a wedding he secretly defunded. My parents had drained $25,000 of my savings to send my 26-year-old brother on a luxury European tour because he felt burnt out. My dad stood at the head of the table, beaming at our extended family, bragging about providing for the ones he loved. He had no idea the manila folder sitting in my car contained the forged IP logs that would freeze his retirement account in exactly 38 hours. People think brand partnership managers just plan corporate events and hand out free samples. We do not. We read the fine print. We look for the exit clauses. We trust ink on paper and very little else. I built my career in Indianapolis, finding the exact moment a contract breaks. I just never thought I would have to apply that skill to my own mother. Daniel and I had been engaged for a year. He teaches high school history, a man who grades papers at our kitchen table and never raises his voice. We wanted a clean, straightforward wedding fund. My parents, Tom and Brenda, insisted on being involved. They wanted to help manage the vendors, claiming their experience would save us money. To keep the peace, I agreed to a specific setup, a two-to-sign escrow account. Neither party could move sums over $10, thou zine without the other digitally approving the transfer. I deposited my corporate bonuses. I watched the number hit $25,000. I felt secure. 60 days before the wedding, I sat at my dining table with a mug of green tea, opening the banking portal to pay our florist. The screen loaded. I blinked, I refreshed the page. The balance read $14.50. The warmth drained out of my hands, leaving my fingers numb against the ceramic mug. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded very loud in the apartment. I did not throw the laptop or cry out. I just clicked on the transaction history. A single wire transfer processed 2 days prior. The destination was a boutique travel concierge service in London. I picked up my phone and called the bank. The hold music played for 6 minutes while Daniel looked up from his grading. He set his red pen down, his brow furrowing at my silence. The bank representative returned to the line, her voice bright and cheerful. She confirmed the wire went through successfully. I asked her how a two-to-sign account authorized a unilateral wire transfer. She paused, the sound of her typing echoing through the receiver. She stated that both account holders signed the digital release form online. I stared at Daniel across the table. Someone had drawn my name on a screen. Someone had mapped my digital signature to release my wedding fund across an ocean. The only other person with access to that portal was Brenda. She did not just take the money. She impersonated me to bypass a bank security protocol. Daniel asked what was wrong. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. My parents just bought a vacation with our future. I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, sharp focus settle into my chest. I knew I had to drive to Carmel and look my mother in the eye, not to yell, but to see exactly how she planned to justify a federal crime. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. Years of negotiating corporate sponsorships and parsing through vendor contracts taught me a singular truth. Money does not vanish. It moves, and movement leaves a trail. I opened a new tab and bypassed the standard consumer banking portal, logging directly into the document verification clearinghouse our bank utilized for high-value transactions. My parents had insisted on an escrow-style setup to safeguard the funds. The protocol required two-to-sign authorization. I navigated to the archived certificates and pulled the specific wire authorization for the missing funds. The document loaded onto the screen. There was a timestamp. There was a digital signature block bearing my name. And sitting right below the signature was an IP address. I copied the IP address and ran a standard geolocation trace. The map pinged a residential router in Carmel, Indiana, my parents' house. Brenda did not just guess a password or exploit a banking glitch. She actively routed the two-factor authentication to her own device. She checked a legal box under penalty of perjury. She forged my digital signature to release my wedding fund across an ocean. I hit print. The machine in the corner of our living room ground to life, spitting out 3 warm sheets of paper. Daniel read the destination line printed near the top margin: London, a boutique travel concierge service. He offered to drive me to the precinct right then. I looked at the black ink on the white page. Filing a police report right now hands the narrative over to uniforms and detectives. It gives my parents the luxury of spinning a story about a family misunderstanding, a simple banking error. I needed to hear the lie straight from their mouths before I locked the cage. The drive north from Indianapolis to Carmel takes 30 minutes. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, his steady presence, the only thing keeping my hands from gripping the steering wheel too tight. He offered to go to the courthouse on Monday. He told me we did not need a formal event to prove our commitment. I told him we were not canceling anything. Canceling means adjusting our reality to accommodate their theft. We crossed the city limit into Carmel. The landscape shifted from pragmatic brick buildings to sprawling estates with pristine lawns and cast iron gates. My parents live in a center hall colonial at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. They purchased the property 3 years ago, right around the time my brother Chase dropped out of his second graduate program. The contrast tasted bitter in my mouth. They lived in a fortress of wealth, yet they chose to hollow out my savings. I pulled into the circular driveway. The tires crunched over white gravel. Brenda was in the front yard wearing a linen blouse and a wide-brimmed sun hat, holding a polished brass watering can over a bed of blue hydrangeas, the very picture of suburban tranquility. I stepped out of the car, the heavy envelope containing the printed bank logs pressed against my hip. I walked across the damp grass. I did not greet her. I asked a single flat question. "Where is my wedding fund?" Brenda did not drop the watering can. She did not gasp or feign ignorance. She finished pouring a steady stream of water onto the roots of a flower. She set the brass can on a stone paver and wiped her hands on a garden towel. She looked at me with a mild, practiced patience. The kind of look a teacher gives a child asking a foolish question. She sighed a delicate flutter of breath. "Chase has been struggling, Maya. He quit his job at the logistics firm. He is facing severe burnout. He needed a reset before he tries to enter the corporate market again." I stared at her. I asked her if Chase needing a reset cost $25,000 of my money. She clicked her tongue. "It was a joint account. We are a family. The money was sitting there, and your brother was in a crisis. We booked him a 6-week European tour. He needs to see the world to find his center." The front door opened. My father stepped onto the porch. He held a golf club, casually wiping the leather grip with a rag. He did not look guilty. He looked inconvenienced by my presence in his driveway. "You and Daniel can just throw a backyard barbecue," Tom said, his voice projecting across the lawn. "It makes more sense anyway. You two are practical. Chase needs the inspiration." The physical impact of their audacity was staggering. They did not just steal my budget. They unilaterally decided that my future was expendable compared to my brother feeling temporary boredom. I asked for the money back. I demanded they cancel the European trip. Brenda lost her practiced patience. Her lips thinned into a hard line. "You are being incredibly selfish," she snapped. "You have a good job. You have an apartment. Your brother has nothing right now. Why do you always have to make everything a transaction?" They were weaponizing my independence against me. Because I function, because I pay my own bills and manage my own life, I am somehow indebted to the child who refuses to carry his own weight. The urge to scream rose in my throat. I wanted to pull the forged IP logs from the envelope and shove the paper into her chest. But the memory of a former corporate mentor anchored my feet to the grass. Her name was Sylvia. She ran the legal compliance division at my first agency. I once sat in her office, furious over a stolen client account, ready to confront the offending manager. Sylvia had handed me a cup of water and spoken a sentence I built my career on. "Never scream at a thief. Just quietly lock the door and wait for them to realize they are trapped inside." Screaming here in the hydrangeas gives Brenda the power. It lets her call me hysterical. It lets Tom play the peacemaker. They expect me to cry. They expect me to beg. I looked at Brenda standing by her flowers. I looked at Tom on his sprawling porch. I felt the weight of the envelope against my hip. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I understand, I said quietly. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotional currency they could spend. Brenda relaxed. A victorious smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She thought she had won. She stepped forward, reaching out to pat my arm. I stepped back just out of reach. Her hand hovered in the empty air. I turned on my heel and walked back to the car. As we reversed out of the gravel driveway, I watched my mother pick up her watering can in the rearview mirror. She thought the conflict was over. She had no idea I just laid the first brick of her financial ruin. We are going to throw a wedding, I told Daniel. We are just going to change the venue. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a demand that would give me the exact opening I needed. But first, I needed to understand the full history of what I was dealing with. The gaslighting was not a sudden defensive tactic. It served as the foundation of our entire family dynamic. I was the utility bill, reliable, expected, ignored until something required fixing. Chase was the investment property. He received attention, bailouts, and endless grace. When I graduated college with honors, Tom shook my hand and advised me to start building a retirement portfolio. When Chase dropped out of his first university after 3 semesters, Brenda bought him a sports car to help him navigate his transition phase. During Thanksgiving dinners, I cleared the plates while Chase held court in the living room, recounting his latest half-baked startup idea. Tom would pour him a scotch and listen with rapt attention while my own promotions at the agency were met with a polite nod before the conversation shifted back to my brother. The theft of $25,000 was not an anomaly. It was the natural conclusion of 30 years of unearned privilege. They looked at my steady salary and my quiet life and saw an untapped resource to fund their golden child. 5 years ago, I sat in a high-rise corner office overlooking Monument Circle. Sylvia looked at me with cold, evaluating eyes. Noise is what weak people use when they lack leverage. If you march into that boardroom, you give them a show. You become the emotional subordinate. Never raise your voice at a thief. You document the theft. You locate the structural weakness in their defense. And you quietly lock the door. Righteous anger feels good for 5 minutes. Structured ruin lasts forever. I applied Sylvia's lesson to the woman who raised me. Daniel and I sat on the hardwood floor of our apartment later that evening. Vendor contracts spread out around us like a paper mosaic. The florist required a $10,000 final payment by Friday. The photographer needed $5,000. We were staring at a sheer financial cliff. Daniel picked up the ballroom contract. We can go to the courthouse on Tuesday. We can cancel all of this. I love you, and that is the only requirement. His offer was beautiful. But accepting it meant surrendering the narrative. If we eloped, Brenda would tell her country club friends that I was simply too stressed to handle event planning. She would frame the downsized reality as my personal failure rather than her financial crime. I reached across the scattered papers and took Daniel's hand. We are not going to the courthouse. We are going to host a wedding. It will be smaller, sharper, and infinitely more exclusive. To execute the pivot, I needed my parents to believe their manipulation was working. I needed them arrogant. Narcissists are most vulnerable when they feel victorious. The next phase required a new venue, a smaller guest list, and a piece of bait so irresistible my mother would swallow the hook without a second thought. Monday morning arrived with the sharp metallic click of the coffee maker. I began the humiliating gauntlet of calling vendors to sever contracts I could no longer honor. The events coordinator for the downtown Grand Ballroom answered on the second ring. I kept my voice devoid of tremor. I informed her we needed to cancel our reservation. I repeated the process with the string quartet, the premium lighting vendor, and the ice sculptor. My search for a new venue led me to an upscale historic botanical conservatory. nestled in the center of the city. I drove there on my lunch break. The structure was a breathtaking cathedral of wrought iron and clear glass panels. Sun poured through the vaulted ceiling, casting sharp geometric shadows across pristine marble walkways. Rows of blooming orchids and towering palms filled the air with the thick, sweet scent of damp earth and jasmine. There were no dark corners here. There were no heavy curtains to conceal whispered lies or stolen funds. Every inch of the space demanded illumination. The facility director informed me the greenhouse maintained a strict capacity code enforced by the fire marshal. The space could hold exactly 50 people, no exceptions. The restriction was not a drawback. It was a tactical advantage. I secured a micro wedding package, using a fraction of the remaining balance in my personal checking account. Now I needed to ensure my parents dropped their guard. I needed to feed Brenda a narrative she wanted to consume. I needed her to believe her theft had driven me into a desperate, frantic corner. I had to build a decoy. During my commute home, I pulled into a strip mall and grabbed a handful of glossy brochures from a payday loan storefront. I drove back to my apartment and arranged the stage on my kitchen island. I spread the brochures out, fanning them next to a calculator and a legal pad covered in frantic scribbled math. I texted Brenda asking if she could drop by to help me review some final catering selections. She arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a ceramic casserole dish, a tangible prop of maternal care designed to mask her actual intentions. She wore a tailored beige cardigan, her posture radiating effortless, untouchable grace. I opened the door and offered a weak, exhausted smile. I let my shoulders slump. I played the part of the defeated daughter. Brenda set the dish on the counter. Her eyes immediately began scanning the apartment, performing a silent inventory of my misery. It took her less than 10 seconds to spot the decoy. Her gaze locked onto the glossy payday loan brochures. She noticed the calculator. She saw the panicked scribbles on the legal pad. I watched her body language shift. The subtle tightening of her jaw then relaxed. A quiet, undeniable gleam of triumph sparked in her eyes. She thought she was looking at the wreckage of my financial stability. "Are you sure you can afford the catering, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial, syrupy concern. She reached out and tapped a manicured fingernail against a pamphlet advertising a 30% interest rate. "You do not want to start your marriage buried in a hole." I looked down at the floor, feigning shame. "We will figure it out. We just have to make some sacrifices." She offered a sympathetic sigh, patted my cheek, and spent the next 20 minutes criticizing my floral choices before announcing she had an appointment at the country club. The moment the front door clicked shut behind her, I swept the brochures into the recycling bin. The bait was taken, the results materialized before sunset. My Aunt Clara texted, "Maya, your mother just told me you are taking out high-interest loans for this party. Please do not ruin your credit." Brenda was actively spreading the smear campaign. She was weaponizing her own crime, painting herself as the worried matriarch watching her materialistic daughter spiral into debt. Believing I was financially ruined and emotionally defeated, my parents grew incredibly complacent. They felt victorious. They stopped scrutinizing my actions. Then the email arrived. I was sitting on the couch with Daniel reviewing the new floor plan for the greenhouse when my inbox chimed. The sender was Brenda. The subject line read, "Final guest additions." I opened the message. It was simply an attached spreadsheet containing 25 names. I recognized them immediately. They were all members of her exclusive country club, women she played tennis with, men Tom golfed with, neighbors who possessed high social standing in Carmel. The math was jarring. The greenhouse held a strict maximum of 50 people. My mother was demanding half the entire venue capacity for her personal acquaintances. "Why does she need her tennis partner at our micro wedding?" Daniel asked. A cold realization settled in my chest. These were not people who cared about my marriage. These were people Brenda needed as an audience. The missing puzzle piece arrived the following afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in the agency office when I opened a separate browser window to check the dedicated email address Daniel. And I set up for wedding vendor correspondence. There was a new unread message from Elise, the head floral designer for the Botanical Conservatory. During the early stages of planning, Brenda had insisted on being the primary contact for the florist. Elise had hit reply all to an email chain Brenda initiated the night before. The text was brief. Good morning, Brenda. I received your updated timeline. We can certainly accommodate the extra presentation arrangement. I will have the design team position the secondary centerpiece near the DJ booth, right before the toasts begin, just as you requested for the surprise announcement. I stopped breathing. Surprise announcement. I scrolled down to read the previous emails hidden in the forwarded chain. Brenda had sent a detailed timeline of the reception. She instructed Elise to prepare a large, extravagant bouquet of imported white peonies, separate from my bridal flowers. The justification Brenda provided to the florist was typed in clear, undeniable black text. My son Chase is returning from Europe with his new girlfriend. We are using the gathering after dinner to officially announce their engagement to our social circle. Please make sure the peonies are ready when my husband takes the microphone for the father of the bride's speech. We are going to call Chase and his fiancée up to the front. I stared at the glowing monitor. The puzzle assembled itself into a flawless, terrifying blueprint. Chase met a girl in Ibiza. The luxury European tour my parents funded with my stolen savings culminated in a vacation romance. They bought him a $12 zeros and vintage Rolex to commemorate his new chapter. And now they were preparing to welcome his new girlfriend into the family. But engagement parties are expensive. Why would Tom and Brenda pay for an extravagant engagement party when their daughter had already secured a beautiful glass-enclosed botanical greenhouse and paid for a catered dinner? They did not just steal my $25,000. They were orchestrating a plan to hijack my actual wedding day. Their endgame was breathtaking in its sociopathy. They intended to use my venue, my purchased food, and my remaining guests as a free curated backdrop for their golden child. Brenda demanded those 25 country club seats because she needed an audience for Chase. She wanted her wealthy peers in the room to applaud when Tom hijacked the microphone, bypassed his toast to me, and called my brother to the front of the room to steal the spotlight. They forced me to downsize my dream. And now they were attempting to steal the downsized reality too. Daniel walked into my home office. I turned the monitor toward him and pointed to the forwarded email chain. He leaned over my shoulder, reading the text. He reached for his phone, declaring he was calling Tom to uninvite them permanently. I placed my hand over his phone. If we uninvite them, they play the victims. They will spend the next 10 years telling the entire extended family that we banned them from our wedding over a misunderstanding. They will control the narrative. We cannot let them stand up there and ruin your reception, Daniel said. They only possess the upper hand if they think the element of surprise belongs to them, I replied. Knowing their endgame gave me the ultimate tactical advantage. They were walking into a building I controlled, eating food I paid for, surrounded by vendors who answered to my final timeline. I realized right then that stopping a narcissist does not involve a screaming match. I had to disarm their bomb before it ever entered the building. Chase was flying home expecting a coronation. He wanted a luxury job, a new fiancée, and a free party funded by his sister's misery. It was time to add a new document to the arsenal. I drove to the agency the morning after discovering the hijacked engagement plot. My marketing agency represents Azure Resorts, a global luxury hospitality conglomerate with high-end properties scattered across the most exclusive coastlines in the world. Earlier that quarter, Azure sent us a brief requesting a new marketing strategy. They wanted a campaign focused on highly curated, exclusive micro-weddings. I spent 3 hours building a slide deck. I bypassed emotion entirely and focused on raw corporate value. I pitched my own wedding as a premier case study. I highlighted the aesthetic brilliance of the transparent glass greenhouse. I detailed the calculated exclusivity of a 50-person guest list. I provided my own social media engagement metrics and the demographic data of my professional network. I offered them the exclusive rights to utilize our wedding photography and aesthetic narrative for their upcoming promotional materials. The vice president steepled his fingers, watching the presentation with sharp, calculating eyes. He did not see a desperate bride trying to salvage her day. He saw a brand partnerships manager offering a turnkey marketing asset. He offered a trade. The contract arrived via courier the following morning. In exchange for the marketing rights to the event, Azure Resorts agreed to fully sponsor our honeymoon. A 2-week stay at their newest 5-star overwater property in the Maldives, first-class airfare, private boat transfers, and a dedicated concierge. I uncapped my pen and signed my name in blue ink. I had replaced the vacation my parents stole with an experience they could never afford. I secured a level of luxury that Brenda spent her entire life chasing, and I did it without touching my bank account. I told no one but Daniel. Silence was our currency. The reveal needed to happen on our terms, on our stage. The narrative irony of the situation crystallized 3 days later. Chase had just updated his professional networking profile. He announced he was pivoting into the high-end hospitality sector. He proudly proclaimed he had secured a final round interview for an executive sales director position. He tagged the company at the bottom of the post. The company was Azure Resorts. I set my teacup down. The porcelain clicked sharply against the granite counter. Chase was flying home, expecting to charm the very executives I just signed a high-level corporate partnership with. He was scheduled to interview with the vice president of global partnerships on the Tuesday following my wedding. The sheer beautiful irony tasted like cold champagne. But I had not yet addressed the digital evidence sitting in my encrypted folder. I had been watching Chase's social media closely. His arrogance extended far beyond expensive meals and luxury goods. He felt invincible, operating under the delusion that his actions carried zero consequences. This hubris led him to post a series of late-night stories from a subterranean club in Ibiza. The heavy bass of the music distorted the phone microphone. Chase was shouting into the camera lens. His pupils dilated. He panned the lens across a VIP glass table. The brief half-second sweep of the camera captured a very clear, undeniable visual of illicit white powder arranged in neat lines next to rolled currency. The true fatal error was the location tag hovering at the top of the screen. He geotagged the post. He proudly broadcast his exact location, tying his illicit behavior to a highly exclusive, globally recognized luxury resort brand. The brand was Azure Resorts. I connected my device to my laptop. I created a new folder on my encrypted hard drive and named it Audit. I dragged every screenshot, every video file, and every geotagged location into the folder. I organized them by date and estimated cost. I was building an irrefutable digital ledger. I also found something else while scrolling through his profile. A close-up shot of his left wrist resting on the leather steering wheel of a rented convertible. Strapped to his arm was a vintage Swiss timepiece, a heavy brushed steel Rolex with a distinctive navy blue dial. The specific model retailed for $12,000 on the secondary market. The caption underneath, "Gift from Mom to commemorate my new chapter. Time to elevate." Brenda did not just fund a vacation. She purchased a $12 Zuzan accessory to reward her son for quitting his third job. She took the money intended to feed my wedding guests and wrapped it around his wrist. That watch was not just a timepiece. It was a serial-numbered physical manifestation of wire fraud. I took another screenshot. That watch was going to become a very important piece of leverage. Chase's digital vanity was a gold mine. He was handing me the nails for his own professional coffin. Then came Brenda's email demanding 25 country club guests. I typed a brief 2-sentence reply, rejecting all 25 names. I pressed send. Exactly 4 minutes later, my phone vibrated. "Lilani, I mean Maya, I am looking at an email that must be a typo, Brenda said, her voice carrying the tight, pinched cadence she used whenever a retail worker declined a return policy. You cannot seriously expect me to exclude the Wentworths and the Davis family from my own daughter's wedding. The fire marshal enforces a strict capacity code of 50 people, Brenda. I am not violating a building safety ordinance, so you can play hostess to your tennis partners. You and Dad have your 2 seats. The rest of the list is void. The line went silent. If my friends are not welcome, then maybe your father and I should not attend either, she threatened. That is your choice, I said evenly. I need a final head count for the caterer by Friday. If you plan to boycott, let me know so I can give your 2 plates to my colleagues from the agency. She hung up on me, but as I stood there in the quiet apartment, a cold sense of inconsistency began to bother my analytical mind. My parents believed I was funding this downsized greenhouse event with predatory high-interest payday loans. If Brenda truly believed my wedding was a financial disaster, why was she fighting so aggressively to invite 25 of her wealthiest, most judgmental friends to watch me fail? She was not trying to invite them to a funeral. She was inviting them to a victory parade. Then came the day Chase arrived home. He initiated the family group text thread, bypassing any customary greeting or inquiry about the wedding planning. Just landed. Need you to update the caterer. I am bringing a +1 to the wedding. She flew back with me from Spain. Add her to the list. He did not ask if space was available. He issued a directive. I did not reply to the group chat. I opened a separate email draft addressed directly to Chase and copied my parents. I attached the official rental agreement from the Botanical Conservatory. I highlighted a specific clause on page 3. The clause detailed the strict enforcement of the municipal fire code. The venue possessed a hard capacity limit of exactly 50 individuals. I typed a 2-sentence message beneath the attachment. Chase, the venue enforces a strict 50-person capacity due to fire regulations. The guest list is locked and security will turn away anyone not on the roster at the door. I hit send. The response arrived less than 3 minutes later. It was a phone call from Tom. Leilani, Maya, what is this nonsense about fire codes? Your brother just got back from a profound journey. He met someone special. You need to make room for her. Dad, the capacity is 50. I cannot change a municipal law. There is always room for one more, Tom argued. If she walks through the door, the venue coordinator shuts the event down and clears the building. It is not a suggestion. It is a legal liability. Fine, Tom said. If the numbers are that tight, you need to cut someone. Tell Daniel his sister cannot come. Your brother's new relationship takes priority. The casual cruelty of his demand was staggering. He wanted me to uninvite my future sister-in-law, a woman who supported Daniel through a master's degree, to make room for a vacation Fling Chase met during an illicit drug binge. I am not cutting Daniel's sister, I said quietly. The list is locked. Chase's +1 is not attending. Tom's temper fractured. You are being impossible. You are acting like a bridezilla. The irony of the accusation hung in the air. The man who stole his daughter's savings to fund a European vacation was calling his victim petty. I simply repeated the reality of the situation until Tom hung up in frustration. What Tom and Chase did not understand was the true tactical value of my refusal. By utilizing the fire marshal code to bar Chase's girlfriend from the premises, I was actively dismantling the physical foundation of their hijacked engagement party. You cannot announce an engagement if the bride-to-be is stuck outside in the parking lot. Their entire ambush required the presence of the girl. By denying her entry, I neutralized their weapon before it even cleared the perimeter. Now I needed to address the financial strike with precise timing. If I acted too early, they would panic and attempt to sabotage the ceremony. If I acted too late, they might escape the immediate consequences of the overdrafts. I utilized my corporate network and reached out directly to Marcus, a senior forensic accountant. He dealt exclusively in metadata, routing numbers, and digital footprints. I sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room and handed Marcus the folder. He reviewed the printed IP traces. He cross-referenced the geolocation data from the Carmel router. He confirmed Brenda circumvented a two-factor authentication protocol, committing wire forgery across state lines to an international vendor. The attorney drafted a demand for restitution paired with a preemptive asset freeze injunction. The language cited specific federal statutes regarding identity theft and wire fraud. The paperwork was finalized and signed by Thursday afternoon. The attorney asked if she should file it immediately. I looked at the calendar on her desk. If we filed the injunction on Thursday, the bank compliance team would process the claim on Friday morning, giving Brenda and Tom a 24-hour head start. It would allow them to scramble, transfer their remaining liquid assets, or hire defense counsel. Worse, it would give them the entire weekend to retaliate. I instructed the attorney to hold the envelope. I told her to hand deliver the package to the Central Legal Compliance Office at exactly 4:55 on Friday afternoon. The beauty of corporate banking bureaucracy lies in its rigid, unfeeling adherence to the clock. When a high-priority fraud claim lands on a desk 5 minutes before closing, the automated intake systems trigger the initial safety protocols. The software flags the targeted accounts. The back-end architecture locks down the funds to prevent further capital flight. But human reviewers do not initiate the outbound client notifications until the start of the next business day. The financial bomb was set. Now I needed to address Chase's career. I drafted an email addressed directly to Marcus Sterling, the Vice President of Global Partnerships at Azure Resorts. I began the email by thanking Marcus for finalizing the micro-wedding marketing partnership. I pivoted seamlessly into the primary concern. I informed him that during a routine social media sweep related to our upcoming campaign, my team inadvertently uncovered concerning digital activity linked directly to an Azure property. I explained that the individual featured in the media was currently progressing through the final rounds of the Azure executive hiring pipeline. I attached the video files and the geotagged screenshots. I concluded the message with a clinical, detached summary. As your agency partner, I felt a professional obligation to forward these materials. The blatant ethics violations and the public association of illicit substances with an Azure property represent a significant brand risk. We wanted your internal human resources department to possess the full scope of the candidate's public footprint before finalizing any executive offers. I did not mention that Chase was my brother. I delivered raw, actionable intelligence, framing his destruction as a routine corporate courtesy. I clicked send. Marcus Sterling replied within 20 minutes. Leilani, thank you for bringing this to our attention immediately. Azure Resorts maintains a zero-tolerance policy for this level of public brand endangerment. I have forwarded these files directly to the head of Global Talent Acquisition. The candidate has been removed from consideration, and all future interviews are canceled. I read the confirmation twice. The knot of tension resting between my shoulder blades finally uncoiled. I kept my hands clean. I did not yell at Chase over the phone. I merely provided the corporate world with the unvarnished truth. Arts Resorts did not just cancel his Tuesday interview. Chase was blacklisted from their entire global network. By sunset on Friday, the board was clear. Every single weapon my family possessed had been systematically dismantled, disabled, or reversed. The stolen money was locked in a compliance audit. The corporate dream job was vaporized. The hijacked engagement plan was severely crippled because the bride-to-be was banned from entering the venue by municipal fire codes. Friday arrived, the day of my rehearsal dinner. At 4:30, the family group chat lit up. Brenda sent a photograph from a high-end boutique in Carmel. She was standing in front of a gilded mirror modeling an expensive tailored silk wrap dress. Tom stood in the background examining a new designer suit jacket. The caption read, "Picking up some final touches for tonight. Cannot wait to celebrate." I stared at the photo. They were swiping their credit cards. drawing from accounts that were about to bleed out behind a bureaucratic curtain. At 4:55, my phone vibrated. A single text message from the attorney appeared on the screen, delivered and stamped. I let out a long, slow breath. The trap was set. Julian and I would host our rehearsal dinner tonight. We would host our reception tomorrow. We would smile, cut our cake, and drink champagne while my mother and father stood oblivious on a trap door. I held the manila folder in my car at the rehearsal dinner. When Tom stood up at the head of the table, tapping his spoon against the crystal to deliver his toast, I did not feel the sting of his hypocrisy. I watched him take credit for a wedding he secretly defunded, knowing his financial solvency expired in 38 hours. I smiled at him, sipping my sparkling water, acting as the silent architect of his ruin. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. The sky over Indianapolis was a brilliant, uninterrupted blue. The glass walls of the greenhouse sparkled in the sunlight. The floral arrangements were pristine, resting on crisp white linens. I stood near the bridal suite, hidden behind a wall of towering palms, watching the entrance. The guests began to trickle in around noon. Daniel's family arrived first, bringing a grounding, easy warmth. Then the heavy wooden double doors swung open, and my family crossed the threshold. Tom wore a bespoke navy suit, walking with the puffed chest of a man who believed he owned the building. Brenda walked beside him in a sweeping silver gown that bordered on bridal. She scanned the room, her eyes darting like a hawk, searching for prey. Chase trailed behind them, wearing a sharp tuxedo and holding his phone. His wrist flashed the $12,000 vintage Swiss timepiece purchased with my stolen savings. Chase was alone. The municipal fire code tactic proved successful. His vacation romance remained stranded at a nearby hotel room, barred from entry by the ironclad capacity limit I enforced. Yet despite the absence of the prospective bride, my family radiated a smug, palpable entitlement. They huddled near the back of the seating area, speaking in hushed conspiratorial tones. Tom adjusted his tie and checked his watch. Brenda patted Chase on the shoulder, offering him an encouraging, secretive smile. They were preparing for their ambush. They believed they could still execute the surprise announcement, perhaps planning to initiate a video call with the missing girl when Tom seized the microphone. They underestimated the defensive architecture I built into the daily schedule. Traditional ceremonies grant parents a designated platform. I stripped every single one of those privileges from the itinerary. When the string duo began to play the processional, Tom did not escort me. I walked myself down the marble aisle, my white silk dress brushing against the ferns. I looked forward, fixing my gaze entirely on Daniel standing under the floral arch. His eyes were steady, offering a quiet harbor. Out of my peripheral vision, I noticed my family sitting in the third row. They were relegated to standard guest seating. Brenda sat rigid, her posture painfully stiff. Chase did not even bother to look up during the ceremony, his thumb continuously scrolling across his smartphone screen. I ignored them. I focused on the warmth of Daniel's hands holding mine. The promises we spoke echoed softly against the glass ceiling. The peace I felt in that exact second was profound and unshakable. I built this day out of the rubble they left behind. When the officiant pronounced us married, the applause from the 46 genuine guests washed over us. The ceremony transitioned seamlessly into the cocktail hour. Brenda saw an opening and initiated her first offensive maneuver of the afternoon. She marched across the room, grabbing the elbow of my hired photographer. She pointed toward the far wall, demanding a staged portrait session of her, Tom, and Chase. The photographer, a seasoned professional named Sarah, lowered her camera. She pulled a laminated piece of paper from her pocket, the strict itemized shot list I provided her during our final consultation. "I am sorry, ma'am. The bride specifically requested no deviations from the approved timeline. I cannot accommodate unscheduled family portraits." Brenda recoiled as if she had been slapped. She glared at Sarah, then shot a venomous look in my direction. I simply offered her a serene, untroubled smile and turned back to Daniel. The realization that she possessed zero authority over the vendors, the space, or the schedule was slowly beginning to penetrate her arrogance. The afternoon faded into early evening. The sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the glass conservatory in shades of deep violet and gold. I sat beside Daniel at a small sweetheart table for two, eating my meal slowly while keeping a vigilant watch on table four. Tom barely touched his food. He kept wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, his eyes darting toward the audio booth stationed in the corner. Brenda checked her phone repeatedly, likely coordinating with the florist who was supposed to deliver the secondary presentation bouquet of white peonies. Chase drained two glasses of wine, his confidence visibly inflating as the dinner service drew to a close. They were collectively bracing for the designated moment. They were preparing to steal the narrative. The wait staff began clearing the empty porcelain plates from the tables. I watched Tom push his chair back, adjusting the lapels of his suit jacket. Brenda offered him a sharp, encouraging nod. He raised his hand, gesturing discreetly toward the disc jockey, signaling his intention to approach the audio equipment and commandeer the microphone. The hijacked engagement plan was moving into the execution phase. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. It was time for the preemptive strike. I stood up first. Daniel rose immediately beside me. I picked up my water glass and tapped my fingernail against the rim. The sharp, clear ringing sliced through the ambient noise. Conversations halted. Faces turned toward the sweetheart table. The disc jockey, recognizing the cue I established during our pre-event briefing, smoothly faded the background music into absolute silence. I glanced toward table four. Tom froze halfway between sitting and standing, trapped in an awkward, hovering crouch, his brow furrowed in sudden confusion. He looked at the microphone, resting securely in the stand next to me. He slowly lowered himself back down onto his gold chair, his jaw tight. I picked up the microphone. I looked out over the faces of the 46 people who genuinely supported our union and the 4 people who attended solely to consume it. I began with genuine gratitude. I thanked Daniel's parents for their unwavering support. I thanked the friends who traveled across the country. Then the tone shifted. As many of you know, Daniel and I originally planned a much larger traditional celebration. However, 2 months ago, our budget was unexpectedly defunded. The word hung in the air. Defunded. I saw Brenda stiffen instantly. Her spine snapped rigid against the back of her chair. Tom blinked rapidly, his confident demeanor fracturing. They expected me to remain silent about the downsizing. They relied on my shame to protect their secret. But the thing about losing a foundation is that it forces you to examine what you are building on. When one door closes, you have to build a better one. I paused, letting the silence draw the attention of every single person in the greenhouse. I looked directly at Chase. He was sitting back in his chair, swirling the remaining red wine in his glass, wearing an expression of bored detachment. Daniel and I refused to let a setback dictate our milestone. We decided to leverage our professional networks. And tonight, I am incredibly proud to share that my marketing agency secured a premier corporate partnership. Azure Resorts has generously offered to fully sponsor our honeymoon. The name of the hospitality conglomerate rang out like a gunshot in a quiet canyon. The reaction from the general audience was instantaneous and joyous. Daniel's sister let out a loud cheer. Friends clapped, raising their glasses in celebration. But at table 4, the reaction was catastrophic. I kept my eyes locked on my brother. Chase recognized the name immediately. I watched the bored detachment vanish from his face, replaced by raw, unshielded shock. His jaw literally dropped. The wine glass stopped swirling in his hand. The color drained from his cheeks. The realization that his sister possessed a legally binding, high-level partnership with the very executives he desperately wanted to impress shattered his manufactured reality. Brenda, sensing the sudden shift in power, reached for her champagne flute, pasting a wide, frantic smile across her face. She raised her glass high into the air, intending to lead a toast, eager to absorb the applause. I did not let her drink. I leaned closer to the microphone. We depart on Monday for a 2 week stay at their newest 5-star property in the Maldives, including first class airfare. I kept my gaze fixed on my parents' table. Brenda's glass hovered near her lips. It is amazing what you can accomplish when you focus on building a career. It truly pays to actually work in the luxury industry rather than just using other people's money to vacation in it. The silence that fell over table 4 was absolute, profound, and terrifying. Brenda's hand froze midair. The champagne trembled inside the crystal flute. The frantic smile cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. She slowly lowered the glass, setting it onto the table with a dull clink. Tom stared at me, his eyes wide, his breathing shallow. He looked like a man who just stepped off a curb and realized the street was missing. The general audience, oblivious to the lethal subtext, continued to applaud and offer congratulations. The disc jockey smoothly faded a celebratory jazz track back into the speakers. I handed the microphone back to its stand. Daniel placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me away from the sweetheart table. We won the room. We secured the narrative. We stopped the hijacked engagement before Tom even touched the microphone. They were sitting at table 4, paralyzed by the sudden inversion of power, realizing they walked into a slaughterhouse dressed in formal wear. But the victory was only half complete. The psychological dominance was established, but the financial evidence remained tucked away. The music swelled, encouraging guests to move toward the dance floor. I stepped away from the sweetheart table and signaled Daniel with a brief touch to his shoulder. He nodded, turning to speak with his aunt, providing me the solitary space required to finish the operation. I walked toward a small decorative wooden credenza tucked behind a wall of ferns. My leather briefcase sat hidden beneath the lower shelf. I unlatched the dual brass locks. I reached inside and extracted the thick manila folder. I walked toward the perimeter of the room. Table 4 sat in a pocket of isolated tension. I navigated the marble floor, my heels clicking a steady, unhurried rhythm. As I approached, Chase stood up. "Maya, hold on a second," Chase stammered, stepping forward to intercept my path. "You know Marcus Sterling. You actually signed a marketing contract directly with the Azure executive team." He still operated under the delusion that our familial bond overrode his selfish behavior. He genuinely believed he could leverage my corporate triumph to salvage his own career prospects. He thought I might offer him a warm introduction, an insider recommendation. I did not break my stride. I did not offer him a single syllable of acknowledgement. I looked through him as if he were a pane of clear glass, stepping neatly around his extended arm. I stopped directly across from my mother. Brenda remained seated, her silver gown pooling around the legs of her chair. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. I lifted the manila folder over the center of the table and let it fall. The heavy cardboard slapped against the hardwood surface beneath the linen. The sound registered with a dull, final thud. "What is this?" Brenda snapped. "That is a finalized forensic audit," I said, keeping my voice pitched low, creating a tight, localized bubble of sound. "And a felony wire forgery notice drafted by a private attorney, submitted directly to the Central Legal Compliance Office of your primary bank." Tom flinched, his shoulders jerking upward. "Inside that folder, you will find the exact IP address logs, linking the digital signature forgery directly to the residential router in your Carmel home. It includes the geolocation metadata matching your device. The formal demand for restitution and the preemptive asset freeze injunction were hand-delivered yesterday afternoon. You filed the legal injunction against your own parents," Tom whispered, his voice trembling thick with disbelief. "I filed a fraud claim to recover stolen assets," I corrected him. "The automated intake system at the bank received the paperwork at 4:55 on Friday. The algorithmic security protocols flagged your portfolio before the close of business. They are currently freezing all of your linked accounts. The formal reversal of the $25,000 transfer processes at 9:00 on Monday morning. The color drained from Tom's face in a sudden, rapid wash, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He realized the trap had been resting beneath their feet throughout the entire rehearsal dinner. Through the morning preparations and throughout the ceremony, they were spending money on luxury clothing while their financial foundation was quietly dismantled. You will overdraft our entire retirement checking. Tom choked out, his hands shaking. The automatic penalties alone will bankrupt the account. We have mortgages drawing from that balance on Tuesday. You spent money that was not yours, I replied, cold and precise. The overdraft fees and the ruined credit score are simply the mathematical consequences of your theft. We can pay you back in installments, Brenda interrupted, her voice rising in frantic panic. We can set up a payment plan. You do not need to involve the banking authorities. This is a family matter. This is no longer a family negotiation, I stated. You bypassed a two-factor authentication protocol to move funds to an international vendor. That elevates the action. This is between you, the corporate fraud department, and the federal investigators. The trap snapped shut. The metal teeth buried themselves deep into their curated suburban reality. They sat frozen at the table, surrounded by the joyful noise of a wedding reception they intended to destroy. But the folder resting on the table only addressed the theft of my budget. Chase was still standing a few feet away, slowly comprehending the severity of the situation. He still harbored the illusion that his own future remained intact. Chase stepped forward, inserting himself into the space between the table and me. His face flushed a dark, angry red. You cannot do this, Chase hissed. You cannot weaponize the legal system against your own blood. We are family. You are destroying Mom and Dad over a misunderstanding. I looked at him. I examined the precise cut of his tailored tuxedo jacket. I looked at the $12,000 vintage Rolex strapped securely to his wrist. He stood before me, draped in luxury purchased entirely with the savings I earned from late-night corporate negotiations and early morning client pitches. He was demanding family loyalty while wearing the physical manifestation of my stolen labor. I leaned in, closing the physical distance between us. Let us talk about the other misunderstanding you orchestrated for tonight, I whispered. Brenda flinched, her head snapping up. I know about the secondary presentation bouquet of white peonies. I know about the timeline you secretly coordinated with the floral designer. I know about the surprise announcement you planned to execute the moment Tom commandeered the microphone. Brenda gasped. The realization that her ultimate sociopathic betrayal was discovered stripped away her remaining defenses. You tried to hijack my reception to announce an engagement, I said, turning my focus back to Chase. But a surprise announcement requires a bride-to-be, and since your Ibiza fling could not get past the fire marshal at the front door, you will have to stage your little performance on your own dime. The color drained from Chase's face. He just understood it was a calculated tactical blockade, designed to sever the head of their ambush before it even breached the perimeter. And Chase, I added, my voice smooth and unrelenting, there is one more piece of logistics we need to clarify regarding your corporate pivot. He blinked a slow, confused flutter of his eyelids. I had a very productive conversation with Marcus Sterling, the Vice President of Global Partnerships at Azure Resorts. During our correspondence, I felt a professional obligation to forward a specific encrypted folder to their Human Resources Department. The folder contained the geotagged photos and the late-night video clips you posted from the underground club in Spain. The footage featuring the illicit substances resting on the VIP table at an Azure-owned property. No. Chase breathed. The word barely escaped his lips. You did not. You would not ruin my career. Marcus was horrified by the blatant ethics violations. Azure Resorts maintains a strict brand protection policy. They do not believe someone who publicly broadcasts illicit behavior while geotagging their luxury properties aligns with their executive standards. I watched the final pillar of his arrogance collapse. The corporate dream he nurtured, the six-figure salary he bragged about, the executive lifestyle he believed he earned by simply existing, all vaporized into the humid air of the greenhouse. Your final round interview on Tuesday is canceled. You are permanently blacklisted from their global corporate network. The rejection letter is likely sitting in your inbox right now. Chase stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant. He possessed no argument. He could not debate an automated rejection email. He could not gaslight a Fortune 500 vice president. I shifted my attention one final time, looking down at Brenda, and regarding the $12,000 vintage Rolex currently strapped to your son's wrist. The private attorney, handling the federal wire forgery claim, already filed the necessary paperwork with the county clerk. We placed a legal lien against that specific timepiece to cover the accumulating attorney fees. If he attempts to sell it or pawn it, he commits a secondary felony. The trap was comprehensive, inescapable, and perfectly sealed. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for an apology. I did not wait for an explanation. They possessed nothing of value left to offer me. I walked away from table 4, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the marble floor, moving back toward the warm center of my reception. They did not stay to eat the wedding cake. They did not stay to watch the first dance. They gathered their belongings in heavy, suffocating silence and practically fled the venue, slinking out the side doors of the Botanical Conservatory. The reception continued without them. The music swelled, the champagne flowed, and the evening unfolded exactly as I designed it. I danced with Daniel under the stars shining through the glass ceiling. The psychological war was won. The legal strike was executed. The emotional rot was excised from my life. Sunday was spent resting in the quiet sanctuary of our apartment, packing our luggage, and reflecting on the sheer perfection of a reception scrubbed clean of toxicity. My parents did not attempt to call. Chase did not send frantic text messages. The silence radiating from the affluent suburbs of Carmel was profound, carrying the heavy, unmistakable weight of total surrender. Monday morning dawned crisp and bright over the sprawling grid of Indianapolis. Daniel and I hailed a private car service, a luxury transportation perk embedded within the Azure Resorts marketing sponsorship package. We glided along the interstate toward the international airport. I watched the downtown city skyline slowly recede in the tinted rearview mirror. I felt exceptionally light, as if a physical anchor had been permanently unclipped from my collarbone. We navigated the bustling departure terminal, bypassing the chaotic security lines by utilizing the priority access lanes reserved exclusively for first-class passengers. Daniel handed me a ceramic cup of dark roast coffee. We settled into a quiet pair of plush armchairs overlooking the expansive tarmac. I set my coffee down and glanced at the digital clock on the departure flight monitor. The glowing red number shifted from 8:59 to exactly 9. The business day officially commenced. A gentle chime echoed from the depth of my leather handbag. I reached inside, retrieving my smartphone. The screen illuminated, displaying a high-priority automated push notification generated by the central banking application. I swiped the alert open. The secure financial interface loaded, rendering the transaction history in crisp black text against a stark white background. The primary individual account ledger displayed a newly executed inbound transfer, $25,000. The origin point listed the Central Fraud Compliance Division. The funds were successfully clawed back, excised from my parents' portfolio by the unfeeling machinery of the federal banking system, and restored securely into my personal possession. I stared at the numeric digits. Daniel leaned over, reading the illuminated screen. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. He lifted his own coffee cup, gently clinking the ceramic against mine in a silent, private toast. While we sat in the quiet luxury of the departure lounge, a devastating financial storm was making landfall inside a Center Hall Colonial in Carmel. The automated compliance software executed the injunction with ruthless surgical precision. Brenda and Tom were waking up to a fiscal nightmare. Their primary checking, their joint savings, and their linked retirement portfolios were instantaneously locked behind an impenetrable bureaucratic wall. The forced reversal of the $25,000 triggered a cascading avalanche of severe overdraft penalties, plummeting their available balances into deep, unrecoverable negatives. They could no longer swipe a credit card to purchase premium groceries. They could not process their impending monthly mortgage payments. The curated illusion of their wealthy suburban lifestyle evaporated, replaced by the grim, undeniable reality of federal wire forgery allegations. They were no longer the proud benefactors of a country club dynasty. They were suspects in an active criminal fraud investigation, forced to spend their morning frantically searching for a defense attorney willing to accept a retainer from clients with entirely frozen assets. The architectural collapse of the family unit extended downward, crushing the golden child beneath the falling debris. Chase returned from his luxury European tour expecting to step directly into a high-powered corporate career. Instead, the Azure Resorts blacklisting effectively poisoned his professional resume across the entire high-end hospitality sector. Executive recruiters talk to one another. Industry compliance officers share risk assessments. His digital footprint featuring illicit behavior at a luxury property transformed him into a profound corporate liability. With his parents facing imminent bankruptcy and mounting legal fees, the financial umbilical cord was permanently severed. Brenda could no longer purchase vintage Swiss timepieces or fund overseas excursions to cure his frequent bouts of burnout. Poetic justice possesses a brilliant, symmetrical poetry. As Daniel and I gathered our carry-on luggage to board our flight, we walked past the sprawling row of budget vehicle rental counters, illuminating the lower level of the terminal. I would later learn through the quiet, gossiping grapevine of extended relatives that Chase was forced to submit an employment application to one of those exact budget agencies. Stripped of his networking leverage and facing the urgent necessity of paying his parents' legal defense bills, he traded his tailored European tuxedo for a stiff polyester uniform shirt. The brother who bragged about chartering private yachts on the Amalfi Coast was reduced to standing behind a plastic laminate counter at the Indianapolis airport, handing out economy sedans to weary business travelers for a minimum wage hourly rate. He was forced to actually labor in the unglamorous, grueling trenches of the travel industry. Paying off the debt incurred by his own breathtaking arrogance, the $12,000 Rolex remained strapped to his wrist, heavy and entirely useless, locked under a restrictive legal lien that prevented him from pawning the accessory for survival cash. We handed our boarding passes to the airline gate agent. We walked down the carpeted jet bridge. Stepping onto the aircraft, the flight attendant greeted us by name, guiding us toward the spacious leather seats situated in the front cabin. I sank into the plush upholstery, feeling the deep, resonant hum of the jet engines vibrating through the floorboards. The 60-day ordeal was officially concluded. The rot was permanently excised from my life. I did not just recover my stolen budget. I utilized the recovered $25,000 to establish a secure foundational down payment for a future home with Daniel, a home my parents will never possess the address to. A fortress built on mutual respect, entirely inaccessible to their toxicity. The fundamental truth about dealing with entitled individuals is that they rely heavily on your emotional reaction to fuel their manipulation. They want the dramatic arguments. They desire the weeping, the pleading, and the loud, chaotic confrontations. It provides them with the necessary oxygen to play the victim and control the narrative. When people demonstrate they value your resources over your humanity, you must deny them that oxygen. You do not scream. You do not negotiate with thieves. You audit them. You map their structural vulnerabilities. You outmaneuver their strategy using the cold, unfeeling architecture of the rules. You build an inescapable cage out of their own hubris, and you leave them holding the bill. Daniel reached across the wide center console, linking his fingers securely through mine, as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. We were ascending toward the Maldives, leaving the wreckage of Carmel far below us in the clouds. The architecture of a family is invisible until it is forced to bear weight. We build our homes on the foundation of shared history, believing the wooden beams of loyalty and tradition will hold us steady when the external world turns hostile. Yet the quiet tragedy unfolding in countless suburban living rooms is the unspoken hierarchy established around the dinner table. The blueprints of these families are often flawed from the very beginning, drafted with unequal measures of grace and expectation. Every family keeps an invisible ledger. In a healthy household, this ledger balances emotional support with personal accountability. But in homes corrupted by favoritism, the math twists into something predatory. There is usually a reliable child, the daughter who pays her own way, remembers birthdays, navigates her career with quiet competence, and asks for nothing. Then there is the golden child, the son whose mere existence is treated as a fragile, precious gift, requiring constant, exhausting subsidies. Parents often confuse appeasement with love. When they look at a struggling, directionless son, they do not see a young man who requires the sharp friction of reality to grow. They see a reflection of their own parenting anxieties. To soothe that internal fear, they offer a European vacation instead of a harsh truth. They purchase vintage Swiss timepieces to mask the hollow reality of his burnout. And when the funds run dry, they look at their competent daughter and demand her resources to finance the illusion. They weaponize the concept of family responsibility, twisting it to mean the reliable child must forever sacrifice her stability to fund the favored child's arrogance. This is not parenting. This is emotional embezzlement. True family responsibility requires the courage to let a child fail. By insulating the favored child from the consequences of his actions, parents rob him of the resilience required to navigate a demanding, unforgiving world. The real world does not honor manufactured royalty. The real world eventually hands you a polyester uniform and places you behind a budget rental car counter. Shielding a child from reality does not prevent the fall. It merely ensures the impact will be devastating when the ground finally rushes up to meet them. On the other side of that dynamic sits the reliable child carrying the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. She internalizes the dangerous lesson that her worth is measured entirely by her utility. She learns to minimize her own needs, downsizing her dreams to accommodate the manufactured crises of her sibling. But loyalty should never resemble a hostage situation. In a functional structure, parents celebrate competence rather than penalizing it. When parents look at their daughter's hard-earned savings and see only a slush fund for their favored son, they shatter the foundational trust that makes a family functional. They force the reliable child into a terrible, solitary realization. She discovers that the only way to protect her future is to build a fortress, lock the door, and let the enablers drown in the debt of their own making. Sometimes the most responsible action a daughter can take is to step away from the table entirely. She must stop engaging in screaming matches, stop pleading for fairness, and simply utilize the cold, unfeeling boundaries of the law and logic to protect her peace. We are taught to revere our parents, to seek their blessing, and to keep the family intact at all costs. But awareness requires us to recognize when the cost of admission becomes too high. It requires the profound, often painful maturity to understand that you cannot heal a dynamic that the architects refuse to fix. If you have ever recognized yourself in the quiet strength of the reliable daughter, or if you have ever had to use cold, unyielding boundaries to protect your own future from the people who were supposed to guard it, you are not alone in this fight. We believe in the strength of paper trails over empty promises. When the dust settles and the bank accounts freeze, A lingering silence replaces the chaos. You sit in a quiet room, or perhaps in a leather seat on a flight across the ocean, and you realize the true nature of the ordeal. The victory brings peace, but it also brings a haunting clarity. You look back at the empty chairs left behind at holiday dinners and the unanswered text messages fading on a screen. You wonder if they ever truly saw you, or if they only saw what you could provide. You build your own table, wide and sturdy, filling it with people who value your humanity over your resources. And somewhere in the back of your mind, the question remains suspended in the quiet air. If we are defined by the families we come from, who do we become the moment we finally decide to leave them behind?